There's really quite something special about a Victorian property, and I don't know whether that's the ceiling roses, the beautiful architraves, those enviable high ceilings, but it's definitely not damp. Now, if you have a Victorian terrace house, unless you've had work done to your property, it's probably likely that you're experiencing something like this during winter. Now, damp is probably one of the worst problems to have in a property. It seemingly never ends. It makes winter an absolute chore. It smells, it's bad for your health, and it will literally cling on to anything that's in contact with it, be it your curtains, a chair that's propped against it, and just about literally anything it comes into contact with. When we moved into our Victorian property, one of the first questions I asked the surveyor was to look for damp, and they did identify it, but because the property hadn't really been maintained properly, we took a gamble and we thought it would be absolutely fine. It wasn't until the winter of last year that one night I thought there was loads of dust on one of our rattan light shades, and it turned out that it was literally covered in mold. And yep, so you will find in this video that rattan is probably one of the worst decorative accessories you can have in your home. But the whole purpose of this video today was to share why Victorian properties are so affected by damp and the ways you can prevent it this winter to ensure that you can prevent it and try and treat it to a certain extent. So why is damp such an issue for Victorian houses? Well, it's how they were built during the Victorian era. They don't have the same building supplies and the methods that they do with today's houses. Solid walls were still being used during those times, so it's easy for rain and cold to penetrate them. And over time, a lot of these houses have been rendered, but if the rendering on the property has become ineffective over time, it leads to rainwater being trapped behind it, which can lead to damp, mold, and basically a never-ending issue. However, one word that springs to mind and is probably a large proportion of why Victorian properties get damp, and that is to do with ventilation. They just don't have it. And a serious lack of ventilation in a Victorian property leads to condensation, and condensation is moisture, water, and lots of it. When that moisture builds up, relative humidity also builds up, and it will start to develop water droplets on your walls and everywhere else that's affected by mold. Basements are a notorious place for mold and damp to develop if you don't have the adequate ventilation in place, and if you do have timber and woodwork and mold spores start to come in contact with it, it can lead to rot, which can cause further issues down the line with structural issues. The idea of good ventilation is so you have a great airflow coming in and out of the property. When you're ventilating the property, you're just essentially taking in new air, but it's not getting rid of that bad moisture levels and all of the damp that's already developed in the property. If you have a lot of damp in your property in the winter and it then suddenly disappears in the summer, it is probably because ventilation is the cause of it. And for us, that's definitely true. Once we've dried out our house during the winter, the summer, absolutely no problems, no recurring mold, no damp, and no breathing issues. And for us, what you might find is it's a specific room that creates a lot of damp, and for us, that is the dreaded bathroom of doom. Our bathroom has been built with single skim. It was an extension, must be about 40-50 years old now, where single skim was acceptable for an extension. And because of that, if you have a hot shower in the winter, it creates shed loads of condensation, and it's just created a world of problems for us. And where we have paneling in the bathroom, yeah, the mold, as you can see, it was just so bad, and we'd clean it and it would constantly keep recurring, and it was just the most frustrating thing ever. And with winter approaching, I'm already dreading the damp return. So it's the question that you all want to know: how on earth do I prevent damp in my Victorian property? Now, the first thing that a lot of people will tell you to do is, have you tanked the property? Now, tanking a property can be a very expensive method, and it's not something a lot of people can afford. And for us, we flipped our house, so it's not something we want to put the money into just right now. So we're looking for preventative measures and ways that we can create a better flow of air throughout the property and increase the ventilation. Now, whilst this isn't a cure, if you do have damp in your Victorian property, you need to get a dehumidifier. It is going to save your life, essentially. Now, dehumidifiers work by taking out the moisture in the air that is present. Not only does this help reduce the moisture levels in the air, it also reduces the risk of developing additional mold spores. Now, the the downside of using a dehumidifier is it obviously burns your electric. It doesn't eat into it a lot, but it's going to depend on who your electric supplier is. And we sort of circulated the dehumidifier around various rooms which were worse affected. And when we did use it, it's quite astonishing how much water it draws off every day. And yeah, that's not a nice part of it. But when we kept using the dehumidifier, we did notice that there was no new mold spores that kept appearing. And whilst a lot of you will say that is not an ideal method, it doesn't treat it. No, it doesn't treat it, but it's going to prevent mold spores developing, and it can be a much more cost-effective way to just get by through a winter without having to fork out for tanking throughout your entire house. And also, a lot of the times tanking may not even work because you've still got that issue with ventilation in the property, so it is worth exploring a few different avenues when you're looking to get rid of the damp. Now, number 2. One of the worst things you can do in the winter, and undeniably in the UK we probably have like the worst wet weather ever, and what do you do in the winter when you've washed your clothes and you don't have a tumble dryer? You dry them in the house. And as I discovered, that's also the worst thing that you can possibly do. Now, your existing mold will love it, but your home and your health absolutely won't. What happens when you dry washing indoors is that the moisture in the clothing gets dispersed into the walls, and it just feeds into the mold and the moisture problem. Now, I tried loads of things, and I think drying clothes in the winter is just an impossible task. So last year I invested in a drying pod. I'll link the video below. Now, the drying pod is essentially a pod which you place your clothes inside when they're ready to dry. You zip the pod up and you turn it on and it heats the clothing. Now, it probably takes about 1 to 2 hours to dry in the pod. Whilst it will spend on electric, it completely removes that issue of not being able to get your clothes dry during the winter and drying wet clothing within your house. And it was definitely a really good investment for us. We've used it loads. I think it was around just under £100 when we purchased it, and we're going to use that, you know, every single winter. We don't have a tumble dryer, we don't have the space for one, so yeah, I definitely look at getting a drying pod if you also have issues with drying washing in the winter and you can't get it out onto the clothes line to dry outside. Now, tanking is something I've mentioned earlier in this video before, and I'm just going to read you exactly what tanking is so I don't get it wrong. So tanking is a term used for creating a tank-like seal to protect walls against water penetration. The building regulations stipulate that tanking must be applied to all new build structures below ground, which totally makes sense because properties back in the Victorian era, those rules didn't apply. But tanking can also be applied to existing buildings to prevent water penetration into basements and ceilings, as well as helping to tackle rising damp. Now, tanking should help with ventilation and getting that wet air out and clean, fresh, dry air into the property, but I have read sort of very mixed reviews and just thoughts about homeowners that have tried the method and they've still got the damp problem. So I do think it's something you need to explore with a builder or contractor or whoever would do the tanking for you, because it's not a cheap method. Although if it does work, amazing, you've got rid of that damp issue, but it's just important to be aware that it may not be the solution that you're looking for. Now, I also want to talk about some more preventative measures that's just going to make it feel a little bit more bearable for you in the winter. This was the saviour grace of last year. Now, this is Seal It Bang Black Mold Remover, and you can pretty much pick it up from anywhere like Wilkinson's, supermarkets, B&M, and it's just pretty much a bog standard black mold remover. One thing I will note is please wear gloves using this on a mask. Oh my god, it smells literally awful, and the smell will cling to your room for a really long period of time, so make sure you've got your windows open. You just need to spray it onto a sponge essentially, and wipe it over the area. It's going to take and kill that black mold, and that's a really important thing to mention, is that if you have got black mold spores, you want to clean those off as soon as they appear, because it is the black mold spores that are really bad for your health, and they will continue to multiply in size. So when you do see that appearing, wipe it off straight away and get those windows open. Now, that is a store-bought solution, but there's other home remedies that you can make up as well. Just a couple that I found is a white vinegar solution. Simply mix equal parts of white vinegar and water into a spray bottle and apply it to the affected area. Let it sit for an hour before wiping away. So that's quite a cheap method. And you've also got baking soda solution. These remedies aren't ones that I've personally used because I just wanted to get something from the shop that I knew would kill it. But if you are mindful about chemicals, then I would look at the natural alternatives because it really did smell. The baking soda solution is simply mix baking soda with water. This will create a paste which you should apply to the mouldy surface. Leave it on the surface for a few minutes before wiping away with damp cloth and drying. And that's another really important thing to note, is do dry it afterwards, because if you're adding water and moisture to that area, it's going to make the damp even worse. So do dry it after you've done that. So as we are heading into winter now and you have a Victorian house and you are dreading damp, please think about the preventative measures that are going to help make your life a little bit easier. Tanking isn't an end-all solution, but it's definitely something to consider if it's maybe your forever home. And in terms of preventative measures, I'd really recommend investing in a dehumidifier, get some store-bought damp killer, get those windows open even during the winter, and have your radiators on sort of an ambient level, because having those high contrasts between very hot and very cold, that is what creates the condensation, and it just feeds into that bad ventilation issue. And lastly, please don't dry your washing inside this winter. Do find an alternative method, whether that's drying it outside in the rain, getting a tumble dryer or getting a drying pod, because it's just going to make your home a little bit happier. And whatever you do, just stay safe. Make sure you clean your hands after touching any mold, and do clean those black mold spores as soon as you see them, as your health is going to thank you for it. So I hope you found this video helpful today. I've also linked my full blog post below about everything you can do to help treat and prevent damp in a Victorian terrace house. And if you have a Victorian house as well, please let me know what you use for damp, or if you found a longer term solution, as I find it really interesting and it will just help with information on this video. So if you liked watching it today, please do give it a thumbs up, and I hope you have a great rest of the week.